Meal planning is important because it prevents us from being a disappointed wreck when dinner time comes around and we have no clue what to make, or even if we have the ingredients to make the meal. It's a time and a money saver, but most importantly, it frees up valuable brain space. Creating a meal plan prepares us for the week to come and gives us peace of mind that we're organized and can feed ourselves and our family. That's why I do it, and that's why Plan to Eat helps me do it. Your subscription includes access to the Plan to Eat website and fully featured mobile apps on iOS and Android. And Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, the ones your family loves and that fit your dietary preferences and needs. And you can create a meal plan around your schedule. Then what happens is the Plan to Eat software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. So sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/timecrafting. That's plantoeat.com/timecrafting. The coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. It's valid for new customers only. Give Plan to Eat a try today. I'm Mike Vardy, and this is the Productivityist Podcast. Welcome to the Productivityist Podcast. It's me, Mike Vardy, back again for another episode. And this week, I'm joined by Matt Bodnar. Matt has been named to the Forbes 30 Under 30. He's called a rising restaurateur star by the National Restaurant Association and a strategy pro by Restaurant Hospitality Magazine. He's also a partner at early stage investment firm Fresh Hospitality, where he focuses on deal making and strategy. And we focus on this episode primarily on his podcast and what he does there called The Science of Success. It's got a ton of downloads over at the time of our discussion. It was 785K plus downloads, and it focuses on improving decision making, understanding psychology, and sharing insights from experts. Now, we talk about like daily architecture in this. We talk about frameworks, awareness, the kind of stuff that I love to talk about whenever I get on an episode and have a discussion with any one of my guests. So we get right into the weeds with this one, some real deep stuff. And I want to help you just do more than dip your toe in. I want you to kind of get in there now. So let's just do that. Here's my conversation with Matt Bodnar here on the Productivityist Podcast. I'd like to welcome Matt Bodnar to the Productivityist Podcast. Matt, thanks for joining me today.
Mike, thanks so much for having me on. It's an honor to be here.
So we've been trying to get this interview scheduled for a little while now. I mean, we've had some. The funny thing is that we. Are you fairly regimented with your scheduling? Like, are you fairly?
I'm militant about my.
Yeah. So when something shows up that throws things off, and I think that for me, and we're going to dive into this is related definitely to what we're going to start talking into is so, for example, if something shows up and I know that I can't dedicate the time and attention or the intent, to the person I'm talking to, let's say on the podcast, or if I'm having a meeting, like I'm having a coffee meeting later today with a friend, I will not have that meeting if I know that I will have other things going on in my head at that time. And I think by being fairly disciplined and, regimented with my schedule in a way that isn't overly, shall we say, like I don't schedule every moment of every day. I have the theming that, my audience knows about that, where like every day has a theme. Are you like, do you feel the same way where it's like, listen, if I'm in, I'm all in, and therefore, and so I have to be that tight because otherwise my mind can kind of go in different directions or my attention can be pulled in different directions?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably not I'm super militant about controlling my schedule and kind of where things go, and only things are allowed to only be scheduled on certain days and that kind of stuff. It less actually from the perspective of, if there's something scheduled and I don't feel like I'm going to bring like 100% to it, I typically probably wouldn't reschedule unless it was like something, really, really vital.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more about trying to create like an energetic flow on a given day that allows that to sort of naturally take place. And so, that starts with, and I think this is, if you look at kind of the daily architecture of a lot of top performers, high achievers, that kind of stuff, even like, Josh Waitzkin's kind of model for daily architecture, who, I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but, multi-time national chess champion, world champion, martial artist, now kind of talks and coaches people on performance. Incredibly sharp guy. And he talks about, having a daily structure and a daily architecture that kind of lets you tap into your natural flow and your natural energy state. And I think, we can get into what that looks like. But for me, like it's all about having my days structured in a way that I'm not getting pushed into kind of a reactive state, and I have as much time as possible for those kind of high value proactive things. And so, without getting super into the weeds, I try to schedule my mornings basically. I have no meetings ever in the morning, like before noon or
Right.
before 1 p.m. And that's always like meditating, learning, thinking, working on projects, that kind of stuff,
That's your
doing
deep.
podcast
That's your
work.
deeper work time because that's when you're at your best,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then when I'm kind of like I'm a morning person, so I try to have my like optimal energy in the morning. And then in the afternoon I'm a little more distracted, a little more frazzled. And so that's when I try to have a lot of my meetings because those are typically, not as high value as kind of that deep work.
Right, right. Now, here's a question for you because this is how I operate. So I'm the opposite. I'm a night owl. So I'm more of a later. So I tend to actually have my interviews, coaching sessions, all that stuff in the mornings because I can feed off the energy of the other people. And is that similar for you? Like it's not so much for me. It's not about the value per se. Although you're right, it can dither a bit. But it's almost like when you're in those situations that you're like, okay, game face, like and if they're bringing enough to the table, it's kind of like when I was doing comedy, like, when I was doing theater work, like if you had nobody in the audience, and there were times where we were doing comedy where there were more people on stage than were in the audience, the comedy suffered because there's nobody to feed from. Whereas, if it's a one-to-one meeting, or if again, if you've got a full house, you're guaranteed to get some kind of laughter going on, even if part of the audience isn't getting into it, but you've got some, you could feed off of that a bit. Do you find that happens to you as well? Like in the afternoons, or when you're being more social, you can kind of either blend in maybe, or just feed off of some of the energy of people around you.
That's interesting. I mean, do you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert?
It's funny. After reading Quiet, I thought I was more extroverted. I find that as I've gotten older, I've become a bit more introverted. I would say that I'm more of like a pseudo extrovert, like the person who, when I'm going, I can go, but then I need that time away. Like I did a workshop last weekend where when I was with the client for pretty much the whole day, I was, on point. But then at some point they said, "Oh, we're going to go here," and I said, "No, I'm going to go. I'm finished for the day." And I basically just went back to my room, crawled into bed earlier than I normally would, and just sat and watched HBO and just kind of decompressed. So I would say I'm probably less extroverted than I was years ago. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. I think I'm probably very similar. Like I'm a very social introvert. So like
Mm-hmm.
I think about introversion, extroversion as like, where do you derive your energy from?
Right.
And to me, an extrovert is someone who derives their energy from being out in a crowd and being around people and all that kind of stuff. Whereas I derive my energy from being alone, basically,
Mm-hmm.
like me time, like quiet, reflective time where I'll put on some classical music or something really chill, and I'll be like reading and thinking, and that's how I recharge my batteries. And so for me, like I don't necessarily draw energy from other people in the afternoons. It's more just trying to align my days with my kind of peak productivity periods with when I think I'm going to be producing the most value. And for me, that's typically in the morning.
Right. And for me, I think the challenge there is because I do a lot of client work, and I know you do consulting work as well. I mean, we'll link to all this stuff in the show notes as well. I think that I almost it's that pseudo extrovert component where I say, okay, you know what? I don't. And remember, where are you? Are you on the West Coast or East Coast? Where are you?
Nashville, Tennessee. So
Yeah, so
Central
you're
Time.
central. See, I'm on the West Coast. So often when people in the East Coast want to meet with me, it's like 8 o'clock. Like I actually had to create a boundary of like, I will not do a call before 8 o'clock. And even then, I'm not, I don't like to do things that early in the morning, but obviously when you're serving people, you want to be able to do that stuff. So it's kind of like the great thing about doing something like that is I can draw, like I raise myself up to that level, but because I'm not I wouldn't say I'm drawing my own energy. I'm kind of siphoning it off of like bouncing it from what they give me. I'm not using my willpower nearly to the degree. So by the time 2 o'clock hits, which is my kind of my peak time, I call from 2 to 4 my making time. I'm in making mode. That's when I'm ready to rock.
That's really funny. That's like my lowest energy time period.
Yeah, it's there's a book called The Power of When. I've had Dr. Michael Bruce on the show before, and we talked about, and I know Dan Pinks wrote When as well, but the idea of your body clock and listening to energy. And I think that this is a really nice way to segue into decisions, because a lot of the decisions that I've made have been based on when can I deliver to myself and to others my best, based not so much on and again, this is why I structure my day by modality and by themes, is when is the best, time for me to approach these things, so that when it's time, like, hey, it's morning, I know that this is the type of work I'll do in the morning. There's no inner war. And then in the afternoon, I know that I'm going to get to making later. So I'm not sitting there at 11 o'clock going, oh man, I've had this great idea. I can just shelve it for later. And 3 hours from now, I can return to it and make a decision as to how far I want to go with it. So having those boundaries in place, having that framework in place, it actually fosters freedom. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super important. And I mean, it sounds like we basically use the same principles and just apply it to sort of when our given kind of peak energy times are. But, I
Yep.
think it's critical. Schedule definitely creates freedom. Having that time blocked off that I know I'm going to be doing, X or Y helps me kind of get into that mode and focus on that stuff. And then when it's time to move on to the next thing, I'm ready for it. And I know that's what's going to happen. And so my modality is morning is kind of my making time and afternoon is my meeting time.
Right. Now, here's a quick question for you. And this is going to it's a quick question, but it's going to dive into some deeper answers, I'm sure. So a lot of people, when they hear about frameworks and they go, oh man, that's too, why structure that I feel too restricted. I feel that there's too many constraints. So I don't feel as creative, or I don't feel like I can, I feel like my space is truncated or my time is truncated. So I can't do my best work. Why? I believe that that's a fallacy. I believe that, we get into that.
It's definitely a fallacy.
Yeah. Why does that happen? Because I know you've spent a lot of time studying decision theory and stuff like that. Why, first off, why do people go that way? And secondly, how do you help people break free from that bias, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, I mean, I think, why that happens is a tough question to answer, but I think there's a meta principle. I mean, because it happens for a million different reasons, right? It's like, why do people make bad decisions? Because there's a lot of reasons underpinning that. And I think many kind of mistakes or bad decisions really stem from like one core sort of source point. And I think that's a lack of awareness, really, a lack of self-awareness, or kind of a lack of knowledge about the broader, sort of what's going on, or kind of digging into the science, or really a deeper understanding of what's at play. And so, if I look across the catalog of people that we've interviewed on the science of success, like, I would say the single most recurrent theme again and again and again is that self-awareness underpins the development and the creation of all of these other skills, whether it's, leadership, networking, communications, learning, teaching, creativity, all of these things. If you're really self-aware and you cultivate the ability to understand yourself and what works for you, then you can kind of solve any of these challenges. You can develop all of these skills. But if you lack self-awareness, then you're kind of in the dark and you end up kind of trapped in a cycle where you're constantly repeating the same mistakes and failures over and over again. So for people who don't really understand what rhythms or kind of attitudes or strategies are the most effective for them, or they're kind of just awash in the world and getting tossed around and don't really think about structuring things in a way that will enable them to do that. I think it starts with trying to figure out, trying to understand, have they even taken the time to look at when do they feel most productive? When do they create the most results in their life? When are they the most effective? When does their energy feel like it's peaking? You have to start with an understanding of kind of what's going on with yourself and looking at your life and seeing, all right, when are the periods or the times or the things that I've done really well, that I've been successful, that I've been aligned, and that I've created a lot of things that I wanted to create? And what are the periods where I felt derailed or unproductive or stuck or frustrated? And starting to understand the characteristics that align around each of those different buckets, and then just taking, the awareness is like half the battle, because once you know that, then you can start to take action and say, okay, I know these type of environments make me more productive. I know these kinds of things make me less productive. And then you start trying to design your environment to eliminate the things that make you less productive, and to start to cultivate and do more of the things that can make you more productive.
I want to talk about, I want to dive deeper into awareness, because I think you're right. Like, I mean, a lot of people make decisions based on, they don't slow down. They kind of they're just going, they're just cranking the wheel. They're not really, they either make decisions based on, oh, this is the way it's always been done, so why would I do it any differently? I don't want to rock the boat, et cetera, et cetera. And they don't slow down. But also, when you talk about this idea of discomfort, like to spend not only time to dive deep, which could feel uncomfortable because you're slowing down for a lot of people feels uncomfortable because it seems counterproductive to do that. And then the idea of once they get in there, they don't necessarily like what they see, or they don't necessarily understand how to deal with what they see. So can we talk a little bit about the role of comfort and discomfort and how maybe people can combat that so that, or at least get comfortable with discomfort. So that way, when they're in that, when they're exploring this, or when they're looking at, I want to make better decisions, I need to sit in this discomfort for a while so I can make sure that I'm going down the right path, as opposed to just going blindly down a path without really, like, again, tapping into that self-awareness.
Yeah, I mean, I think before we dive into discomfort, which is a super important topic, I mean, I think I want to zoom back out and talk a little bit more about, one of the things that I studied tremendously and spent probably the most time in my life thinking about and studying is kind of the meta skill that I call the art of decision making, which is how to make better decisions, right? And the reason that I'm so obsessed with decision making, and comes from not only interviewing, top experts in psychology and neuroscience and people like astronauts, hostage negotiators, all kinds of stuff, but also spending countless hours reading, and studying people like John D. Rockefeller, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, all these kind of top achievers. And, when I look at it and try to figure out what are they doing that is so much more high leverage than an average person, right? How are they?
Right.
Because the value they're creating is not sort of linearly related to how much time that they're investing, right? Like there's at a certain threshold, you can't just hustle more and spend more time. You have to be doing stuff that's more high leverage to create the results that you want to create. And so I'm obsessed with this kind of this breaking point of like, how do you become more high leverage? And I've studied that and spent a ton of time kind of consolidating my thinking around it. And I created basically a 5-part framework that I call the art of decision making. And the first thing on it, the first step is, when you look at these top performers, these kind of high achievers, they repeatedly, like one of the most strong commonalities is that they use what Charles Duhigg calls contemplative routines to determine what's most important to focus on, right? And so that comes back to what we were just talking about a second ago, which is taking the time to figure out, like, if you think you're too busy, you have too much going on, I can't blah, 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 it makes me think of the saying, like, if you don't have 10 minutes to meditate, you need 2 hours.
Yeah,
right?
and people need to, like the 5-minute journal would be a great example. Like, it's in the title. Like, it's 0.3% of your 0.03% of your week. Like, if you need to, and some people need to quantify it. They need to go, oh, well, of course I have that much time, but they don't think about that in the moment, right?
Yeah, and if you look at, I mean, there's Harvard Business Review studies and all kinds of stuff that's gone into this. But if you don't take the time to slow down and think about what you should be doing, and you just keep doing, you are objectively less productive. And again, Harvard has written about this, done studies about this, all kinds of stuff. You're objectively less productive than people who actually spend the time first to focus and figure out, what should I be doing, right? Yep. And I mean, Tim Ferriss has talked endlessly about that. There's a really good book called Essentialism that digs into that.
Gregory McEwen, yep, absolutely.
And there's a great saying that I think it's from the Marines that it's talking about, like, snipers, right? And it's slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? Which kind of encapsulates that really simply. But I just want to underscore again and talk to that point that you mentioned, which is like, for people who think they're too busy and have too much going on, that's exactly why you need to carve out the time, because you need to figure out what you should actually be doing. And if you can't stop and do that, then you're going to keep being really ineffective and wasting a lot of time and a lot of energy.
Right. And just to underpin that is the idea that people who, there's that saying, if you don't have time to meditate, then you need to meditate.
Exactly.
Right? Like, that's a common phrase. People say that, like, I don't have time to meditate. And you absolutely need to meditate. Like, there's no question you do.
Yeah, exactly. And because it gives you meditation is one of the pillars of awareness, right? And that awareness helps you to start to see where you're wasting time, where you're spending time, where your energy is getting sapped, what your priorities really need to be. And when you look at the top performers, top achievers, everything from world champions, billionaires, etc., it's really clear that they spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about what they should be doing and constantly whittling away. And then they just execute on those really impactful, really high leverage items. And they create massive results as a result of doing that. And, to come all the way back to discomfort, which you touched on kind of before I started going on this rant, it's a fundamental component of digging into and understanding yourself, right? And really, even well beyond your own results. I mean, if you want to be emotionally tough, if you want to be mentally strong, if you want to, play on the level of world champions, people who compete under immense pressure, that mental toughness is built on a relationship with discomfort, right? And most of us live in a world where whenever we encounter something uncomfortable, we shrink away from it and we say, "Oh,
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with that." But the funny thing is the battle with discomfort is built and kind of waged in your daily life. It's those little moments where you feel uncomfortable and you just kind of push into it instead of pushing away from it, that your comfort zone slowly starts to expand and expand and expand. And the first time you do something, it's really, really scary or confusing or whatever. The second, third time you do it, you're starting to get the hang of it. The 20th time you do it, you have a pretty good sense. The 1,000th time you do it, you're bored, right? And it's
Right.
just building that tolerance, cultivating that ability to withstand that discomfort. What happens is, and I call this the sphere of discomfort, and this is something I've written about, and we have a couple podcast episodes about this too, but it's like basically this idea that whatever the results you can achieve in life are kind of encapsulated in this sphere of things around you. And the more uncomfortable you're willing to get, the bigger and bigger and bigger that sphere grows. And like opportunities appear and things manifest that you can't see or understand unless you've started to push that frontier out. And if you never push it out, then the only opportunities and things you're going to see are things that are right in front of you and things that are easy to do. But if you keep stretching yourself, keep getting uncomfortable, the more you do that, the more you keep reaching and finding these new opportunities and ways to create value in your life, to do things that are really fun and exciting, to challenge yourself, to grow, etc. And really quick story that kind of encapsulates that. When I look at my own life, like this interview wouldn't be happening if I didn't constantly push myself out of my zone of comfort. I would have never had a podcast if I hadn't constantly pushed myself out of the zone of comfort. I wouldn't have gotten to the steps that led me to the podcast, which is a whole long story, if I'd never pushed my zone of discomfort. And so it was like this progressive story, and I actually tell it in the podcast episode I have about embracing discomfort. But like, if I hadn't taken all these little mini steps, every single one of them, I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you and wouldn't be sharing it with, people all over the world. And this is only another step towards getting more and more uncomfortable with new things and new frontiers that we're going to continue to push the boundary and continue to create, cool and exciting and new results in the world.
So before we wrap up, I want to dive into an element, because I'll share mine, and then I'd like to hear if you'd be willing to share yours. So the funny thing is you're right. Like, discomfort never goes away. The higher you, as life changes, as you go down these paths, whatever paths you go down, it shows up in new, like you said, unexpected ways that you just didn't, that kind of either come out of nowhere, or that you kind of expected them, but you never were quite sure. Like, for example, like imposter syndrome would be one, right? Like to feel like, oh, if I just stay in this place, then I won't push myself far enough, because I feel like I'm not worthy to do that. So I'll just stay here. For me, I combat it by capturing everything and making it as deliberate and intentional as possible. So instead of putting down like write book, I'll break it down into smaller tasks so that I am more comfortable about moving forward with it. A lot of people don't do that. They'll write down write book and they'll go, oh, there's no way I could possibly do that. But the other thing is comparison for me is a big thing. So I'll look at what's going on in my sphere or my space, and I'll see what other people are doing. And it's human nature to go, oh, well, they're doing that. How come I'm not doing that? Or look where they are, and how come I'm not there, et cetera, or vice versa. And I think it's going to always happen. And for me, the biggest thing, and we're going to talk about this in the bonus episode, is journaling. Journaling's kind of been my saving grace with stuff like that. Because I'm not going to put that stuff on Facebook or anything like that, although I guess I've kind of shared it publicly with thousands of listeners right now. But I'm not going to necessarily write about that on Facebook or do anything like that. Instead, I'll kind of internalize those deeper in a journal. What about you? What are obviously you've said, like, as an introvert, like pushing yourself outside of your zone of comfort, doing things like this, your podcast. But are there anything else that you find, like, you've interviewed some pretty heavy hitters. You've achieved a lot in your own outside of the podcast as well. And a lot of that stuff we're going to link to in the show notes too. I mean, there's lots of stuff out there. If you Google Matt Bodnar, you're going to find a lot of stuff. So the question is, what right now do you find that you're feeling that aura of discomfort about, and then what are you doing to kind of push past it or manage it if that's all you can manage to do at this point?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of kind of circling back to the idea of being an introvert, right? Like when I have a natural tendency, like when let's say I'm sitting on an airplane or I'm going to a cocktail party or mixer or whatever, like I have a tendency to not want to be really social and engage with people and go talk and all this kind of stuff. And so, I went to a conference. There's a strategy that I use to kind of break that apart, and I would consider it. I don't know if I would consider it basically a subset of the idea of rejection therapy, which I don't know if you've talked about on the show, but we interviewed Jia Jiang, who's kind of the owner of rejection therapy, the creator of it, and did this whole thing, 100 days of rejection, all this stuff. And like rejection therapy is an incredible strategy to just develop a really healthy relationship with discomfort broadly. And I used kind of a specific toolkit within that. It's called social skydiving, which is basically when I would go to an event, let's say like an event where I didn't know anybody, and especially kind of like a marketing event where there's like a lot of people there that a lot of them seem really successful, and I don't know if I'm successful with them, blah blah blah, all the kind of stuff you were just talking about, right? Like self-doubt, imposter syndrome, all these things. Social skydiving is basically this idea that whenever you're out somewhere, you find the most intimidating like conversation or group of people that look like they don't want anyone to like bust in and talk to them or whatever. They're right in the middle of something, and you just like roll into their conversation and no plan, I had no idea what you're going to say, just be like, hey, what's up? Right. And you kind of keep throwing yourself into these situations where you're constantly trying to like put yourself out there and figure out like with no safety net basically, and realize like it's not that scary to go and talk to strangers, right? It's not that scary to like strike up a conversation with a total stranger. And I recently I hosted this scavenger hunt in Nashville that was like a video photo scavenger hunt. And the whole idea was kind of underpinned with some of the themes from rejection therapy. And I invited all my friends to participate in it to kind of give them some lessons in getting uncomfortable. And so like some of the challenges were like, make a phone call with a stranger's cell phone, right? Take a photo of yourself sitting at a table with like a family of strangers, and like all these things, like get a photo of yourself in a cop car, like all these different challenges where the goal was to basically say, yeah, this is uncomfortable. And if you want to win the scavenger hunt, you got to get uncomfortable, push yourself out there and do it. And what you realize when you start doing that stuff is it's actually really fun. And once you kind of break through that, like especially someone who's an introvert that, kind of has dealt with being shy and not wanting to talk to people and wanting to kind of sit in the corner on my phone or just talk to my friends at a cocktail party or whatever. When you get out there and push yourself out there, it's amazing to see how much the world opens up when you're willing to embrace discomfort and kind of challenge yourself and get out of your comfort zone.
Matt, this has been great, and there's a lot more we're going to talk about in bonus episode. I want to dive into routines journaling, and I want to talk about some of the books that you recommend, but we're not going to do that now. We're going to leave that for people who get the access to the bonus episode. But Matt, where can people find you and your work online so they can dive deeper into decision making and your framework and all that stuff? So where can people find you?
The best place to find me online is actually I've taken kind of the 4 steps to making better decisions. And I created a free guide that you can get by going to successpodcast.com/better. That's BETTER. It consolidates like all the thinking and writing that I've done around decision making into a really succinct guide that kind of gives you the whole framework. And it's a really, really powerful tool, something that I use pretty much every day to shape how I think about the world and how I make better decisions.
Awesome, Matt. Thanks for taking the time to join me today on the Productivityist podcast.
Thanks for having me on here, Mike.
And that's it. Big thanks to Matt Bodnar for joining me this week on the show. Big thanks to John Polster for producing the show. Big thanks to my team for putting together the show notes, which you can now review on the website or in your podcast app of choice, and follow up on what else Matt's doing and any other relevant links that we discussed. And, if you want to take it a step further, you can give us a rating and review in iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Ratings help. Reviews are even better because they give us context, help us make the show better. And if you want to take your Productivityist experience to the next level, you can check out productivityist.com/membership to learn more about how you can become part of the Productivityist community. Lots of big things happening behind the scenes and soon to be in front of the scenes as this episode is being released. So I encourage you to check that out. Again, productivityist.com/membership. Again, thanks to my entire team for putting this show together. John Polster has produced so many episodes now that, it's crazy. He is my right-hand man with this podcast, if not the man with this podcast. So big thanks to him. Big thanks again to my team for putting imagery and show notes and all that stuff together. And big thanks to you for listening. Really do appreciate it. Until next time, I am Mike Vardy, the host of the Productivityist podcast, reminding you to stop guessing and start going.